everyone. Welcome to the Law Firm Reboot podcast. My name is Nick Worker. Now, during this podcast, we'll be featuring recordings of panels that took place live at Answering Legal's 2024 Law Firm Summer Reboot Camp. Before we dive into that recording, I wanted to briefly let you know a little bit about the camp's host, Answering Legal. For those not already familiar, Answering Legal is a 24/7 virtual receptionist service that exclusively works with the legal industry. Whenever lawyers can't get to the phone, our highly trained receptionist team is there to make sure they never miss the new client. Answering Legal now even integrates with your favorite legal softwares and provides a free mobile app. As a thank you for checking out our podcast, we're giving you a special free trial offer of Answering Legal, which includes an additional $300 off of services. To take advantage of this offer, visit answeringlegal.com, book a discovery call with our team, and just let us know you watched our Reboot podcast. Please note that this is a limited time offer. Now, without further ado, let's get to our panel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Answering Legal's 2024 Law Firm Summer Reboot Camp. I'm Stephanie Everett, and I'm going to be your guest host for this panel. I'm excited to be here with Leticia and Allison. And so this panel is brought to you by the Lawyerist team, and it's called Smart Hiring Strong Firms, Healthy Recruitment Practices for Your Firm. So we are excited because this is one of our favorite topics. I think it's so important in part because, let's just be honest, a lot of people get this wrong. I say it all the time, there was no HR class in law school that taught us how to hire people, and yet it's such an integral part of our firm. We have to get the right teams. Our people are our number one assets. They're our best assets. So how do we find the right people on our team? So to kick it off, I guess I should probably do some intros, or maybe do you guys want to do I'll put you on the spot. You want to do a 30-second elevator pitch here for us?
Sure, I'll go for it. I'm Allison Harrison, owner of ALH Law Group. We are a business litigation and estate planning firm in Columbus, Ohio.
I'm Leticia DeSuze. I'm actually one of the business coaches who works with lawyers, and I help law firm owners grow healthy practices and lives that they love.
Awesome. And I also, like I said, I'm Stephanie. I lead the team over at Lawyerist and also do business coaching there, as Leticia said. And we love what we do. I think it's easy to say. So today we're talking about hiring, and maybe even before we get to that job posting, which we're definitely going to talk about, I think there's some really important steps that need to happen when we're just thinking about maybe it's time to hire. And so let's tackle a few of those. And Leticia, I'll start with you. What are some critical things that you know firms need to do when they start to think about this process of is it time to hire?
I mean, when to hire, or what needs to happen before they hire?
Let's assume they've made the decision to hire, and so they know they need to hire. Now what?
They know they need to hire. Now what? I think it's really important to know what skills, where the skills gap actually is in their firm or in their team, because some people go to creating a job description and just base everything off of a title or a role, and without really looking holistically at where are the gaps in the firm, where are the gaps as it aligns with the vision and where we're planning to go. So I think doing a skills gap and then mapping out the position that they need to hire for and the requisite skills for the position. I think it's just so much more than just posting a job ad because we need a paralegal, we need a rock star for our team. I think it's a little more detailed than that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I wonder if either of you have an example of that skills gap that might help kind of solidify this for folks that are listening today.
I can jump in because I've made bad hires before, and I think I finally corrected a lot of that. When I first started my firm, I thought I needed another attorney. Well, it turned out I needed a paralegal or an admin assistant to be able to do it. And so the thing that I have found for me is when When I have been overwhelmed as the owner, it's doing a time study. What am I spending time on that I don't, as a lawyer or owner, need to do? And then what does that role look like? I don't start with the title. I start with what are the skills, and we use creative titles, so the title is kind of different anyhow. And then when we find employees that are overwhelmed, we kind of do the same thing. What do you hate doing? What do you want off your plate as that employee that can come off your plate? And then what does the role look like based on that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things, even in skills, we were chatting before we went live, sometimes we need people who can create from blank space, right? Like you might know that your firm needs more systems and processes, and you need someone who can come in and help you think through them and create them. Other times you might be in a place where you're like, no, I have the systems in place. I need people who can execute on them or improve them and make them better. And those are very different skill sets. I know I have often where we've had not success is when I've asked a team member to create something for the company that, and they're not good at that. Like they're just like, they can't start from a blank page is the best way to describe it. So I think it's also, like you said, okay, I need a paralegal. Well, what does a paralegal do? But it's also thinking about what else, like how does our firm operate, and what are those gaps that we're seeing even within this role that I need someone who can come in and help us build out the systems for the paralegal role or actually execute on them. Does that help, you think?
One of the things I think that I see that bottlenecks a lot of firms around hiring is the lack of awareness. So, for example, sometimes if a solo firm owner is looking to hire, there's sometimes a lack of awareness around their own skill set and what it is that they actually need that's complementary. So if you find that you're a visionary, you can see where you want the firm to go, but you have a hard time implementing the things, you really need somebody paired with you who's very diligent, very task-oriented, who will take those things off your hands and get them done. If you're more of the doer and you like checklists and you can get things done, then you need someone who can innovate and who can think strategically and who can help you think through the next step. So I see a lot of times the law firm owners sometimes lack of awareness about their own skill sets can create a bottleneck there.
Yeah. Another thing I think a lot of firms miss in this early on process when we're starting to think about who we need to hire is what I'm going to call like core values, right? There's certain things, we know we preach this all the time, that every firm has core values, whether they've sat down to define them or not, but really thinking about what does it take to be on your team? What does success look like? And I guess the best example I'll throw out for this and then kick it over to you two, here at Lawyerist, we love iterating and improving. Like we're constantly challenging ourselves, like how can we do that better? And we had a team member, this has been years ago, who came to me one time and she was like, this quarter, can I just keep everything the same? I don't want to improve anything. I don't want to do anything different, right? And I realized like she is a great person and she's a great worker, but for her to be successful in a work environment, she wanted to come in and do the same thing every day and have it be known and predictable and she could just do it. And so to her, working on our team probably felt crazy and chaotic. Like she probably was like, why are you people always trying to change things on me? And it was like really unsettling. And that was a great learning lesson for me because now I know when in our hiring process, we need to be testing for that. And we need to be really honest with our candidates about that. Like, hey, if this is what you're looking for, day in and day out, you do the exact same thing and we never really try to tweak it or improve upon it, or we throw a new piece of technology at you or whatever it is. I mean, we hope we have a reason for doing it, but we're always going to be experimenting. And so it's things like that, really taking a step back and thinking about how your team works and your core values that I think help people that's where we have mismatches a lot of times in our hiring process.
So I can jump in and speak to that. I'm a Lawyerist member for everyone, so just give that context and disclaimer. Before I joined Lawyerist, I didn't do vision, values, any of that, because I was like, oh, that's silly. Who needs that? And I made bad hires. I'm a very tech-forward person, and I use a lot of automations and a lot of different systems that not all law firms do, and I hate paper. So scan it, shred it, that's my motto. So before I did any of my mission, vision, values, I hired people who were paper. You were going to court, you needed a paper file. Well, that doesn't work because I don't want to print it. And so after spending time realizing like technodexterous is a core value, you have to know how to use technology to its fullest, not just like I can kind of use Word. And that's led to better and better hiring each and every time I bring someone on the team. It also let me go fully remote for a while, which was incredible because we didn't have paper.
Yeah, I think that's a great example.
I think when creating core values, it's really easy to Google to see what other firms have created and just put something together that sounds good and they're dishonest. And so I think when creating core values, it's really important to go within to see what really matters to me, because that becomes the basis of everything else. And so I see a lot of core values, they sound really good on paper, but it's not necessarily what is really driving the decision. So I think it's really important to be honest about that.
Yeah. And maybe that's even a good segue into what we're going to do next. We got a question in the chat. What's a good number of core values to start with? The rule of thumb is always 4 to 6. You want your team, for everyone to be able to know them, right? These become the rules of the road for you. They're the rule. I always say like they're the rules of the sandbox. They're how we're going to play together. And so you want them. I've seen firms with 10 or more, and I'm like, that's just hard to remember. And so it's not just how we're going to show up together, but we really do use this as a test for hiring. So let's talk about this next. In our hiring process, we have an interview that's only focused on core values. And so one of the things that you're going to want to do you've done the hard work of figuring out your core values, the role that you need to hire, the skill set you need, those unknown skills like Leticia was talking about, where are the gaps that you need for your team. Now you want to really define your hiring process and think about each step, right? So we're going to go through it. Obviously, you're going to advertise for the job, and then you're going to probably have some kind of screening, and then you're going to have interviews. And you need to think, like, is it 1 interview, 2 interviews, 3 interviews? I mean, we used to do 3 and 4 interviews, if I'm being honest, but then the hiring market got so competitive and tight that we were like taking too long and losing great candidates because our hiring process was too long. And we're like, okay, we got to cut back on some of these. So we really need to think about, what is your process going to look like and what are the goals for each step of that process? And I'll let you guys chime in if you have other thoughts on the hiring process.
So this kind of is hiring in core values. It's great to have them, but if you don't reinforce them and talk about them regularly, they're not worth the paper you wrote them on. And so just having those, like, one of our core values is get outside. And so we try and encourage our team members to get themselves out of the office, get your work done and leave, because that's part of what drives our culture. And that's also important to impress when we're doing hiring and talking to people. How do you get outside? How are you separating yourself from work when you have the time? And so, and the same thing, technodexterous, right? I'm going to give you a skills test in the hiring process to make sure that you can use some of the the stuff that we consider basic technology, because we want to make sure that with a little guidance, you can figure it out and you're not going to ask 10,000 questions.
It just made me think about the interview process when people read job descriptions, because people do pay attention now, and people say, like, I've heard people say things like, oh my goodness, this feels so values aligned with everything that I'm looking for. And employers, law firm owners feel good about that, like, oh, that aligned with them. How does this align? How is this values aligned with you? What about your personal values aligns with these values? I think we can do a little bit more deeper digging when having these core value conversations, as opposed to saying, wow, this job description really resonates with me because of the core values. But how? Say more about that. Like, what are your values? And I don't see that happening a lot.
Yeah, it's a really great way to get to know people more authentically in the interview process too, when you dig into them.
Because we do have a free resource on our website about how to think through your core values. If this part of the discussion's a little newer to you, and the reality is you do have core values. Like I said, they exist whether you want them to or not. These things are they just naturally happen. But I always say we're trying to define them, and you can be a little bit more aspirational with them. You can't be completely aspirational with them, but you can gently move in the right direction as you go to define them. But ultimately you do have them. So we'll give you guys a resource if you're curious about, okay, I need to dig into my core values, because that's going to be such an important part of the hiring process for sure. The other thing, Allison kind of like snuck in a little thing there that I think is important. So as you're building your hiring process, most people, like we said, you're going to have your marketing, your advertisement. We're going to touch on that next. Then you're going to interview or do a screen and some types of interviews. There's also a question of a skills test. Like Allison said, she wants to do she's going to do some kind of skills test as part of her hiring process. You want to think through this before you get started, because you want to be able to tell your candidates what to expect. And so for years, like at Lawyerist, we've actually done a final, when we got down to our final candidates, so we're now down to the top 2 or 3, we do a paid homework assignment. So I know a lot of firms out there, just ask people to come in and do some kind of assignment. We like to pay people for it. I think it's just the good thing to do. And it sets a great tone with your candidates. They're like, wow, okay, because you really are asking them for free work. And you really should match the homework or skills assessment to the job you're interviewing for. So we always think really thoughtfully about what is this role, and then we can decide what kind of test we want to be. So if it was a new associate, for example, an entry-level associate, I might ask them to come into the office and say, for a skills test, if I had an office, assuming it's not remote, and I might say, here's 3 cases. I'm going to give you some cases. I'm going to give you a scenario. I want you to read through this and write an email to the client that answers this question. Like, how can we simulate some real-time work so we can then evaluate that person's skills? If it was a receptionist, obviously I'm not going to give them that. I might give them something completely different. For marketing, we've had people read a chapter of our book and then create a social media, like create 3 or 4 social media posts around a concept in that book to kind of see how would they promote the work we're doing, right? For a marketing job. So you really can tie your skills tests, our homework assignment, to the job, and you want to have that all thought through before you go into the actual hiring. All right.
I think you said something really key there, and it's the fact that you value people enough to pay for their time. That you value them enough to pay for their time, because sometimes the what's the word I want to say? The hiring process can feel very one-sided, and it's kind of like this, what are you bringing to the table kind of thing, as opposed to, let's see if we're a good fit to do this great work together. So to your point about it setting a tone, I think that's the tone for mutual respect, and it plants really good seeds for the beginning of the relationship, whether or not they're hired, whether or not you actually end up hiring them.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, let's keep us moving. We got lots of stuff to cover. In the next topic, I think, you guys know I get really excited about this one, because now it's time to advertise the job. And I already know, I'm just going to spoil it for everyone. What you are not going to do is go to Indeed, type paralegal or associate, and copy and paste whatever the heck you find other lawyers are doing. It's bad and it's boring. So we know that's the old bad way of doing it. What do we need to be doing instead and differently?
I'll take it. You got to stand out, right? So last year I was trying to hire for a paralegal and attorney, and I couldn't find an attorney to save my life. I interviewed so many bad people based on a posting that was what everything else kind of looked like. Hey, we're a law firm. We need an associate. Here's the comp. Here's what the cases are. I got mediocre applicants. When I changed it and just leaned into what makes us unique, so I do estate planning and focus on the queer community. Our trademark logo is estate planning for the gays and theys. And so that's how we started. Do you like working with the gays and theys? Do you like working with a diverse group of people? And so on and so on and so on. And the applicants we got from just like leaning into that and standing out were so much better than the applicants we've gotten before. And so I think really leaning into your core values and what makes you you and all of those things is going to make you get better applicants right off the bat. The other thing too is if you are always talking about your culture, you might get people who just apply even if there's no posting. that's something that my firm's starting to see just because of the marketing that we've been doing on social.
I think the authenticity part of that is really important. So I worked with one of the attorneys at Lawyerist to actually help him. He probably had the Indeed type job description, and I was just like, this is bad. Like, this is really bad. Like, let's rethink this whole thing. Anyway, he poured his heart and soul into it, and it was just really who he was, what he believed, what he was looking to create. And he hired an attorney that left Big Law to come and work with his firm, and they brought a paralegal with them. He couldn't believe it, but it was the job description and those things that actually caught that associate's attention.
Yeah. I think, what you guys are really driving home is, number one, it is an advertisement. It is marketing. Like, it has to do its job. So it has to stand out and attract people. In order to do that, you need people to get excited about what you offer. And what I would tell everybody is this is where you have to be authentic. So like, just bring it and bring it hard in terms of like who you are. So I have seen postings, for example, that have been like, we work really hard. Like, if you don't have work-life balance, please, or whatever, you want to call it today, do not say that. Like, if you're like, hey, we work 60 hours a week and we get our cases to the Supreme Court as a result, or we make a lot of money because we bill more than anyone else. Like, whatever your authentic message is, you need to say it, and you can say it in a fun way. Like, but you need to tell people, like, you don't want to trick people, right? You want to find your people. That's the whole point of this. And it sounds crazy, but it works. When you say, this is who we are and this is what we want on our team, those people will find you. And so like, I had a firm once, it was a family law practice, a high-end, they did high-end divorce work, and they were like, listen, we can't have any wallflowers because we deal with really risque fact patterns. And by the way, everyone in our office curses like a sailor. We drop the F-bomb every other word. And we were in the South. So guess what we put in the job posting? We put those things in there. And then, by the way, this becomes a screening mechanism because we're going to ask people not just to send us a cover letter, but tell us based on this job ad why you are a good fit for this team and you want to work here. And the person we ended up hiring was like, oh my God, I found my effing people, like in the, right? Like, yes. I mean, if I just told you we curse like sailors, curse in the application, like that makes sense. I know it sounds, yeah, but that's what people want, right? Like, but you've got to think about, like, you got to think about your special sauce. I mean, I always joke, like, I read an ad once I was working with this lawyer, and I was like, this kind of says, work here, we don't suck. Or, it was just like, I'm like, how do we spice it up? Because when you really bring it, and the other little flavor of this that's like the A++ work is to think about what's going to make someone who's perfectly okay, happy in their job right now, read it and say, I didn't know I was looking, but oh my God, I need to go work there. That's where, like, you got to think about how do you get those people to apply to your job? Because that's really who you're trying to attract. And you got to get in their head, and you got to not just think about it from your perspective, like Leticia was saying, but like, what can you offer them that they're not getting now in their current job?
People always say, I hear this all the time, like, I want A players on my team. Your ad does not read like you want A players on your team. Your ad reads like you barely put anything into it. And it just makes me think of just like a dating profile. So many people feel like they get catfished because, wait, you put this picture here and you had a mouth full of teeth, but now you've only got 2. Like, show your gums and show just like everything that you have and find like who is genuinely for you. And I think so many people are afraid to do that, or they just haven't known to do that, but want candidates to be really, really forthcoming and just pour their whole heart and soul out to you in an interview. Just not going to happen.
And I think, too, on the flip side, from the employer side, it cuts down the time of looking at resumes because you can quickly tell who stands out and who doesn't. And so just from like that burden on yourself, if you have a really great job posting, you'll save yourself time.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else we want to say about job postings? I think we've covered it. Hopefully everyone's hearing the message that you've got to stand out. You got to be authentic. You need to capture that, applicant's attention. So we say in there, here's what we're looking for. here's who we are. Like, if what is it you're trying to build? Like, get them excited about what you're doing. You get to come be a part of this. Obviously you're going to describe the roles and the response, the job itself. And then more about your team, your core values, and those examples that really can give them that flavor. There's some people who go even beyond that, and they'll have a landing page on their website that can speak to applicants. You can do videos. You could have videos of your team members, just quick ones, like, what do you love about working here? Tell us, what is the culture real? Like, you kind of have to, in today's market, you're recruiting too. So you want the best candidates. So you really want to put your best foot forward, and hopefully your team backs up all the things that you're saying.
I was just going to say, lawyers can use a lot of really big words because you're really, really smart. Your ad doesn't have to read like this unless this is the way that you talk all the time within your firm. You can use regular, everyday language and still have a really, really good job description.
Oh, amen. The other thing that I was going to add to it is, just because you have it on Indeed or LinkedIn, that's not the only place you can market. If your firm is really active on social media, that's an absolutely great place to put it. And then, like, your personal accounts as well, because you know so many people, and they may know someone who's not super happy in a role, but is a great person or a great attorney or paralegal. And so just leverage what you have. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to put this into the ether and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. You should do that. You need to post everywhere. Ask your team to post everywhere. Ask your friends to share it. We've got to get it out to the right people. All right, so now our ad lives in the world, and hopefully those great candidates are coming in, and so we're screening them, and it's time to start doing interviews. So let's go through some basic practices that we know work for the interviewing process themselves. So does one of you want to kick that off?
I think it's know your strengths and weaknesses on the interviewing process. So I know that I am a visionary, and I am not good at all of the details. And so when I had to hire my first few people before my firm was bigger, I brought in my wife. She is very detail oriented, and she's operations, and she's the opposite of me. And so it's like, find someone who's like you. That's what I need help with, because I know I can't spot it. At least I couldn't then. I've gotten better. And so having that second set of eyes to help sit through some of the interviews is really, really helpful. And then the other thing is, don't underestimate culture fit. You may have an amazing candidate, but they ain't going to work in your culture, right? And so you need to have some of those culture questions built in. And that goes back to your core values, right? We don't quite say the F-bomb every 3 words, but one of our core values is no bullshit. Like, let's get to the point. And so we got to have someone who's not going to use a ton of Latin words to deliver an answer.
I actually like interviews that feel like conversations, and they don't feel like, this is really formal, like, let me have this interview. Just, you can still get to the core questions and have those things that you want to answer, but human to human, creating connection and just having a conversation, I find that kind of tone really disarms a sense of people feeling like they need to perform or jump through hoops, and they can just have a genuine conversation, and then you make assessments based on that.
I think that's true. I've done all my interviews for in-person roles at coffee shops, not in my office in a traditional setting, but somewhere where people are more comfortable to chat.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say that. I didn't say it at first because a lot of things happen remotely. But when I was a corporate coach, one of the things that I did every single day is I took people out to lunch. Like, before lunch, sometimes they didn't want to talk, but over lunch, everybody, it's like the playing field is level. And so one of the best ways to connect with people when you can is when you can see them in person in some form or fashion before they're brought onto your team, when it's possible.
Yeah. And, I'll just weigh into every interview should have a goal. So especially if you're going to have multiple interviews, you should go in with a plan. I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that I'm just going to say this. I've heard this advice a lot where people say, find someone that you want to go out after work and have a drink with. Okay, well, great, except my next drinking buddy may not work the same, right? My drinking buddy may not want to follow my systems and processes and constantly iterate. They may just want to hang out and, talk shop or whatever. So we can't just approach these things as, I think a lot of we're often busy. Let's just be honest. We're doing lots of things. We've all had this happen where all of a sudden the calendar shows, what's my next appointment? And you're like, oh, it's an interview. What have you done to prepare? Let's just be really honest. You need to have if you've done your homework, you've dug into their resume and hopefully the questions the answers they've sent over, and already going in, and you've thought about, remember when we first started, you have that profile. So what is it you're hiring for? And you need to now match, where are the gaps and where do you need to figure out if this is the right person? One way to approach this whole hiring process is you've got the whole world out there and you're trying to narrow it down to the one right next person for your team. So what information do you need to figure out during this interview process that's going to help you assess, is this the right person for my team? Not just, do I want to go hang out with them and have a drink after work? We got to know, can they do the job? Or how are they going to show up? Do they have the skill set that I need, that I'm missing on my team? Like Allison said, are they detail oriented or are they big picture? And so you can't leave that too much to chance. You really need to think through, what questions can I ask that are going to help me get that information? And that, honestly, that just takes work. And, there's a lot of research out there on interview question types. And this is where we can kind of talk a little bit about behavioral interview question types, because there is some research that when you ask people a question a different way, you get a different answer. And so one of my favorite stories that will exemplify this comes courtesy of my husband, because, he doesn't like to listen to me. And he was hiring a delivery driver for his company. He sells beer, craft beer. It sounds cooler than it is, but we need a guy who can drive the beer around town. And so I said, here, use these interview questions. And of course he looked at them and thought, okay, Stephanie, whatever, but you're my wife and I'm going to appease you. So he did not want to ask my questions. But he did. And so one of the questions was, tell me about, what do we normally do? What we normally do is say, hey, are you a hard worker? Because this job takes hard work, or this job might require you to work after hours. Is that going to be okay? And most people are going to say yes, because that's what they assume you want to hear. And so that's what they're going to say in an interview. But instead, I had armed Jason. And so I said, ask this instead. So he said, can you tell me about a time when the workday ended, and there was still work to be done? What happened? And this kid had just graduated from college, and he was like, oh yeah, I had an internship once where that happened. And the boss came out and said, hey guys, we have all hands on deck. I need everybody to stay because we have to get this thing done. He told him all about it. And he was like, okay, cool. Well, then what happened? And the kid was like, well, after about 20 minutes, I was bored, so I bounced. And we were like, okay, one, we never say bounced. So that was just a little comical for us, because it just showed maybe it shows our age more than his age. But when you ask someone to tell you about a time when, or how do you handle this, you throw them in some hypotheticals, or you throw them in, what would you do if this thing happened? They're more likely to to tell you the truth, right? And to give you an answer that you needed to know. And so we got way more information out of that interview to be able to make a decision about this candidate than if we had just said, are you willing to stay after 5 every now and then if we need it? And he probably would have said yes, and then we would have been frustrated when after 20 minutes he bounced.
I think the one other thing, I think that's great, Stephanie. I have this conversation with my wife all the time. I hear her say the same thing to her team, and I was like, use different words. It works better. I think for me, when I'm interviewing, the questions candidates ask me also are really meaningful, because if you come into an interview and you don't ask me a question at all about what it's like to work here, what the responsibilities are, I'm not interested. And so the way for me, and this might not be for everyone, is I start the interview and say, look, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. And when I say I'm done, then I want you to ask me all your questions. We might address them in the middle, but paying attention to what are they keying in on when they're asking you questions, because that's going to lead into something that is either a concern or a red flag. because they may say, well, how often, is it crunch time? Okay, well, they don't want to work late, right? Like you're getting those cues. And so it's also, you need to listen when they're asking questions.
So I think I can totally understand that. I think it's also important not to form snap judgments and make conclusions, but you can use those opportunities to get more curious with people, because you may say something and my initial thought process is to form a judgment or a conclusion about what you meant. But if I get curious, then maybe you get to turn that red flag pink, or, it turns a different color because I've given you the opportunity if you're someone that I may have been otherwise interested in. And so I found that to be the case, because sometimes people say things and you're like, what do they mean by that? Well, the only way you know is if you really ask, because it might not be what you think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true, Leticia. Sorry, I was thinking if there's multiple questions at the same thing versus one that you find out there's something else. Yeah.
I was just thinking about that, because I know, for example, I'm a muller over, I can absorb and have a conversation, and my questions may emerge after I've had some time to think and process, and it may be an hour later, as opposed to, or I may have done a lot of research on a website, and so those initial questions were answered for me. So that's what made me think about that.
Yeah. One of the other things that I think it's important to share with folks, if you're doing, multiple people are doing interviews in your firm, so you want all of them to also be prepared. And I'm thinking back when I was in law school, the big firms kind of all did the same hiring process, right? Where you would show up for your on-site interviews anyway, and you'd start in one person's office, and then you'd go to the next person's and and you had like 30-minute interviews, and you had about 6 of them in a row. And the reason I'm calling that out is because think about what happened in those scenarios. You had 6 conversations, but most of the time, like there was no, they would ask you the same questions, right? At least that's what would happen to me. And they'd start in, so you kind of found yourself just having the same conversation, but with 6 different people. And what a missed opportunity to figure out the information you need to make a good decision. So instead, what I would encourage you to do, and maybe that's not your setup, but even if you have 2 people interviewing, the 2 people should connect and talk in between the interview. So if I'm interviewing Allison, and I just had my first interview with her, and we have our profile, we know these are the things we're looking for. This is what we want to hire for. This is the qualities we want in our next hire. I may go to my team member, in this case, we'll say Leticia, and I'll say, listen, I just met Allison. She's great. I think she really showed me, 1, 2, and 5. I'm still stuck on 3 and 4. And you know what else? She mentioned this thing. Maybe it was nothing, but maybe that's a little bit of a pink flag. Should we explore it more? So now we can be armed for that next interview to get more information, additional information, and have a more unified, a better approach. Because at the end of the day, again, I love the idea of like, stay curious. You're trying to figure out in a very short period of time a lot of information, and it can be really hard. So we just don't want to have 2 people at the firm necessarily have 2 disjointed conversations. So I really encourage you guys to think about, think it through, the whole process through, for sure.
I also like when you have like people that are in the interview process that can look through different lenses. So it makes me think of Paige, who is pretty straightforward, pretty to the point, seems a little bit detached, like it's just going to get to the point very quickly. Whereas Jennifer is more like heart-centered, and so there's going to be this different approach. So I think when you can have different approaches, it's like we've kind of gone through the different approaches that our team takes, and then this is who rises to the top when we've gone through this filtering process.
And I'm glad Allison gave your wife example, because I was hoping you were going to mention that. If you're on your own right now and you're thinking, that's great, but it's just me, bring in a spouse, bring in a neighbor, bring in a friend. Maybe you even compensate them or take them out to dinner for their time. Like, it doesn't have to be free, but hey, because the other thing we know is when we're interviewing, we tend to hire people like us. It's just normal, because who I want to go hang out and work with is going to be someone who shows up to work like me, right? Like, that's just human nature. So it is a great idea to find someone in your network who has the skill set that that you want to hire, and ask them, hey, will you come be a part of my hiring process and help me out? So you don't have to do it on your own, and you don't even have to do it with your current team. You can bring other people into the mix. That could be super effective.
I think that's a great idea. I used to work with an attorney, and I said, you always look at things through rose-colored lenses. And she said, I was actually voted that in high school, that this is the way that I see. But she would always ask me to sit in on her interview processes, because I'm just like, nope. And she's like, how do you know? I'm like, no, absolutely not. I was so detached for it. But if you look through rose-colored lenses, or if you really like people, I've heard that it can dim your own sense of discernment, because you're already leaning towards, whatever feels familiar or whatever you gravitate to with this person.
The other thing it helps with is if you are hiring from behind, meaning you needed to hire someone a while ago. I have been guilty of this. You are so desperate that you're like, that's kind of like a pink flag, but I'm just willing to roll with it because I need help. And when you bring in that person, they can just say no. Like, my chief storyteller has sat in on some interviews or done her own interviews, and she goes, yeah, they're great. They are going to be a horrible fit here. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, on paper, they answer these questions. And then we go through it and have conversations with that person who did the second interview. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that pink flag's really a red flag. And that was another red flag. But I was so focused on I need help that I missed it. And so having that person who is a little detached can help you from making bad choices.
Absolutely. The other thing I would encourage everyone to do is be super honest in your interview process. So, you're going to get to a point where you like the person and you are recruiting them, for the most part. And even, I actually put this as a LinkedIn post yesterday, even if you end up rejecting someone, you want them leaving with a great feel for you and your firm, because they may be your next referral source. They may be your next client. Like, what if they go get a job in-house and then they end up hiring you, right? So you want to treat everyone super amazing, professional. Think that through. There's going to be a time, though, you're getting close on making an offer, and it might be an opportunity for you to be really honest with the candidate, and especially if you still aren't sure and you have some concerns, and say, listen, for someone to be successful in this role, they need to do these things or have these qualities or whatever it is. And I'm telling you that because I know this is a two-way street and you need to make the best decision for you. And so the best thing I can do for you right now is give you some inside information about how we operate so that you can self-select out, or you can get really excited and be like, yep, that's not a problem. That's exactly who I am. And I think sometimes we're worried about that. Like we might scare people off, but we know the cost of a bad hire. It's expensive. So I'd rather you have to restart, and you also especially if you're hiring from behind, you think, oh, we didn't find someone. We got to go through this whole process again. It's better to do that, because when you make a bad hire and it's expensive and it takes a long time. It's really terrible. So invest the time.
So Stephanie, you said that they may be like a referral source, or they may be a client. They also may be a potential hire. Like, I've worked with someone that they hired 2 paralegals in the last couple of months, and they didn't work out, but they stayed honest and kept the communication open with the person who was initially disappointed that they weren't selected. And then they reached back out, like, if you're still interested, we would like to offer you the position. No ego, no anything. And so now that is the person who is currently in the role. So sometimes it happens when you can keep the doors of communication, the communication open.
I also think it's honesty on what they're going to come into, because if that is your approach, is you're just going to lay it out there, right? You're showing them very easily, like, this is what it's like to work here. We lay it all on the table, kind of, we're not hiding anything or politicking. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, one mistake that most companies, it's not just law firms, most hiring companies get wrong is communication throughout the process. So the more you can communicate, let people, they just want to know what to expect. If you're on interview number 1 and you're like, listen, we have 5 interviews and this is going to take 3 months, say that up front, whatever it is. Or you might say, we're moving really fast, because you just want them to know. You want them to know what the process is. When are they going to hear back from you? Make sure you are following up and telling them, and actually, even if it's, hey, this is actually going to take us a few more days. We're sorry, but we're still going to get back to you. You know, keep it really clear. And you can also ask them where they are in the process. They may be fielding other offers. They may be, you know, I had that once where it was the very first, like, we were really early in the interview process, and the person reached out, and my top candidate was like, hey, just so you know, I already have another offer I'm considering, and I have to make a decision by this date. And I was like, I'm going to be honest with you. There's no way we're going to be through our process by then. But I kind of took a little chance. I was like, the things you're telling me about that company, though, because they kind of gave me this whole, I don't know, they shared some stuff. I was like, I took a super chance. I was like, listen, I'm a business coach by trade, so I'm going to do something, and I'm sorry if this is inappropriate, but you basically just told me in your message all the reasons why this may not be the best job for you. So even if I don't offer you a job, I don't know that the one you're considering is going to be the right job for you either. So I do what you have to do, but I've got to get through my process. Turns out they did turn the job down. They knew they were right. We did end up hiring the person. They're very happy now. But you know, timing, it can be hard. Like, there's a lot of timing games going on in the process as well. You know, as we're kind of thinking through this now, well, I guess the next piece we should probably, before I ask you guys just for some general tips and thoughts, you know, we're through the process and ready to make an offer letter, and or send out an offer. And I think it's important that the person is excited. Like, we want this to be fun and happy. And so what ideas or thoughts do you have there to kind of, now we have this candidate and we're like, come on, we want you to join. What should we do?
So there's a book, How to Never Lose an Employee Again, which lays out a bunch of ideas. But I think the most kind of universal is you're super excited when you accept a job. And then as soon as you accept it, you're like, oh, shit, did I make a poor decision? Like, I think that's everyone. It doesn't matter what it is. When you bring on a new client, sometimes you're like, this is amazing. And then you're like, oh, no, is this going to be it? And I think you always have that. And so it's, how do you, as an employer, get people excited? So like, we send a video that has everyone on our team saying, hey, so-and-so, we're so excited to have you on board. Like, meet the team, get to know everyone. And then we try and follow it up with like a $5 gift card to Starbucks to say, like, get a coffee on your way in on us. We can't wait to see you. And then just try and make a little bit of a celebration of them joining the team. But that's also, and it's part of our culture, right? We'd like to celebrate when things happen and go well, whether it's just a verbal acknowledgement or take you out to lunch or something more. It kind of starts the culture from day one. I don't know. Leticia, do you have any other thoughts there?
I was just thinking, like, I don't know that one. I need to think about. Is this like when you're sending out an offer letter after they've accepted? Like, what phase are we here?
For me, that's once they've accepted. Like, we send out the offer, and if they have questions, you know, I always send out the offer and say, if you have questions, ask me now. Like, I'm an open book. I don't want you hemming and hawing because you weren't sure what something in the offer meant. And so it's assuming they've accepted.
Anything that makes people feel a sense of, you know, welcome, we're happy to have you, we're looking forward to working with you. Some people do that with gifts. Everybody has a different love language. It might work with a video or a phone call or a gift or swag, or, you know, but it's just like, we are excited to have you, because so often just in regular life, nobody is excited to see people or to have them around. So this is like, somebody wants me. So it can make people feel really good about the decision that they've made. So if they're having a bit of acceptance remorse, which is what I'm going to coin what you said, then maybe that would quell it.
Yeah, I just put in the chat a link to the podcast we did with the author of the book that Allison just mentioned, which is Never Lose Another Employee Again. One of the examples he gives in that book that I thought was so super fun is this one company, they build into their interview process, the interview questions, these these little, they probably seemed like nothing kind of questions to the applicants, like things like, what was your favorite hype music, or you know, do you, what if you were going to splurge, if someone was going to spend $20 to splurge on you, what would it be, right? So the person's forgotten all about those questions probably. And then when they start this one company, and they were a sports themed company, so it probably made a lot of sense for this one. But on their first day, they have the person come at a very specific time, and like 9:15 or something, 9:17, we want you to be there. And when they come through the door of the building, they have everyone at the company come out into the hallway and form this high five line. And they have the hype music that the person said in their interview that they want in. And everybody, they come through and they high five the employee playing the hype music. And then it ends in the conference room. And I think they, now again, sports themed. So they get their rookie jersey. They get their rookie t-shirt. And then once you've been there for a year, you get a team jersey for their company with like your name and your number on it, which is the year you started or something really super fun. But it works for that company. But it's just also, it's like thinking through. So we're already thinking about onboarding and bringing that person onto our team all the way back in the interview process. And so if you map out that interview process and you can be really intentional, then you can do that. And you can find out with somebody, like Leticia said, is their love language gifts? Or do they want, how can I show appreciation for them when they get started on my team? You can also ask them when they first start. The reason I like that is because this allows you to customize something for someone based on their preferences. So me, being a card-carrying introvert, if I saw like an assembly line of people high-fiving me somewhere, I would probably be like, oh my goodness, like where can I go and hide? So I'm saying it allows like the customization of things that have really given consideration, I should say, to their preferences. Yeah. I should also mention, I'm thinking, I know Kyle's on and she put some links in. I've put a few podcasts up. Obviously, we have had a podcast going for a long time, so we've covered this a lot. Another episode we did was all about negotiating salary, which was super interesting, and we took it from both the employee and the employer side. So, we get it because now we've found this person, and now we kind of have to sometimes do the hard stuff, which is, okay, how much do you want? Some states now, a growing number of states are requiring that you post a range or a starting salary information in that advertisement. So you should check your local laws, but it's also just best practices now so that you are pretty clear about what you're doing. Clio, actually, if you look at one of their job postings, they do it and they talk about salary in a very interesting way. I'm not going to be able to call up the exact words now, but I remember the last time I saw it, I sent it to someone because I was like, they did a good job of being like, here's our range, but it doesn't mean you're going to start at the top. It means you may start here, but this is how you're going to be evaluated in this position. I can't remember the exact words, but I'm sure it's easy enough to find if you Google that.
And I think, Stephanie, in that podcast you talked about, there's an interesting point that stuck with me that was like, it doesn't matter what the person's necessarily expected. I think, and I'm probably butchering it, but it's like, if you're paying them to do this job and this is how much this job pays, then pay them that job, not like anything lower or less than, because you're paying them for the expectations you have for the position. And that's always really stuck with me and has paid off when hiring.
Yeah. I think sometimes in the past, people may have taken the approach of like, let me get this person as cheaply as I can. And that you're kind of starting off on the wrong foot there. You want to be competitive with the market. There's some tools you can use to figure out market rate for jobs. And, you should think about your compensation philosophy and how you're going to approach comp decisions with your team. But yeah, I like thinking about like a market rate, not just because someone maybe they were terribly underpaid at their last job. That doesn't give you permission to now underpay this person. You're much better off paying them market rate. It also is going to help you retain that person, right? Because if you just also short them, they're going to find a position somewhere that will pay them for the job they're doing and what they're worth.
One of the things that I find, I know we're wrapping up with salary, especially for associates, but it's not necessarily limited to that, is when you determine what market, more money by adding more value. And so then it becomes a little bit more autonomous, that the more value they're adding, they can be compensated above and beyond the market rate. And so sometimes there's a way to meet people in the middle. You not just lose people because your initial salary is not what they're looking for.
Yeah. And I've even in the very first interview, we've asked the question, I think the way we phrased it was, if we get through this entire process and we're ready to make you an offer, are there any deal breakers that could come up from you? Like, what would need to be true for you to be excited and to accept this job? Because if they say, like, they may say something, and I have had somebody at that point, even though we've advertised a job salary range, say to me, well, I know you advertised this, but I really need to make that. And it would be like $40,000 more than what we advertised. And I was kind of like, oh, okay. Well, I mean, I tried to not act shocked and surprised in front of them. I was like, well, okay. But that was good information to know. And so the question is good because it does draw out things. Like, I could have gotten all the way down to the end with this person and then have landed that. So it allowed us to be thoughtful and make some decisions and have harder conversations with that person. Like, maybe we're just not there, or there may be other things that they come up, like they need health insurance, or they don't need health. I mean, who knows what they're going to say, but it really is a great open-ended question that's going to get you information that you need, much earlier in the process. What are any other kind of parting thoughts, best practices that you want to make sure that we don't leave out?
From experience, hiring from behind is the worst. And it's the hardest thing to do is like, you're like, oh, I'm a little too busy, but I'm not busy enough to hire someone. That's when you need to, for me, that's when I've always should have started the hiring process, because it's not instantaneous. And you also need time to train folks. And so when I've hired behind, the people I bring on get a little shortchanged because I don't have all the time to train, because I'm trying to stay on top of that and train them. And it's just something that as you grow in ownership that you keep in mind is don't wait until you're super behind, because it's a horrible time to hire.
Love that. Well, unfortunately, I think this is all the time we're going to have for our discussion today. I know that the three of us have absolutely enjoyed being with you today. If you have other questions, you can also always email us. Email me at stephanie@lawyerist.com. And we really hope you enjoy the rest of your day at Answering Legal's Law Firm Summer Reboot Camp. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.